Well, we're absolutely delighted now to be joined by Andy Revkin. Andy, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you very so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
It's my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your current role, what you're up to.
I started at National Geographic Society, which is the .org part of the National Geographic universe in March. So I'm a newbie, and I first thought about going there in 1980 when I was just starting to think about journalism, but it's taken me a long time and here I am. And I'm mostly, right now, not writing. I'm mostly there to facilitate, to sort of energize and support and actually fund breakthrough journalism, communication, and inquiry, and education, and technology innovations using data for sustainability.
So there are around 28,000 people who might be interested in one of those facets you just spoke to, either in securing grants or telling their own sort of science stories. So my question is really, how is it that we start to bring climate change and environmental stories, the stories of hope and action, into the fore in the media? I think we talk a lot about doom and gloom, ice sheets melting rapidly.
Sure.
How do we tell the stories of action and hope? I get to experience those, but I don't see those.
It's, I think, well, what I've learned since 1988, when I started writing about this, and this is pretty doom and gloomy, and the whole thing was about, oh, you must do this, it was everything we've seen ever since, sea level rise, etc. What I've learned in 30 years of inquiring on this is that the best thing to do is to split this in pieces. That global warming and climate change, first, they have so many different meanings culturally and scientifically, that if you're just saying global warming, there's a new study saying it's warmer, that doesn't really have any action points. But when you dig in on vulnerability, what makes us vulnerable to the things the climate system does, there's a thousand stories there. And when you look at the energy side too, emissions reductions, new energy frontiers, there's tons of stories there. And as everyone has learned in the climate journey, there's no one answer anyway. This idea that we would have some treaty, a top-down approach to a treaty that would kind of have everyone doing the same thing and having some kind of shared system of punishment and reward is just not going to happen. What happened with Paris is that got translated now into a much more flexible approach, nationally determined things. And that makes it all the more important in different countries to be assessing, well, what is it in our landscape in India or Thailand or the United States that we can do actively to cut vulnerability, explore new energy frontiers. And then suddenly it's not that thing that everyone's fighting about.
So how do you, we just spoke about the international and national sort of scale of the issue. And what about thinking about media on a national scale, but then hyper-local? I see a really important role in my community for local journalists to be telling and making those connections for their communities, because often our readers don't necessarily only look to the large national outlets. So what is the role of starting to tell those place-based positive narratives in local news? Just any thoughts?
Well, it's a sweet spot for us right now. We're starting a partnership. I can't really say more right now. That's a collaborative reporting experiment in a watershed in the United States to get the media that are scattered around a watershed, most of which are struggling, small, and maybe some bigger entities, to have a co-reporting approach to living in a watershed. And that's kind of like a really cool prospect. If we can make it work, it's an experiment. So, and then in Ohio, there's a journalist I met at something called the Solutions Journalism Network, which says a lot about what's happening in journalism right now. What can we actually do that's useful? As opposed to just saying he said, she said, or whatever. And he's pitched the idea of a national network, a collaboration around exactly this point. And I think those are the exciting prospects. And there's one other element of that, which is for the community, to enable the community to tell its own story and do its own exploration. And there's a bunch of experiments like that underway. Thriving Earth Exchange is one, but there's others too.
It's a tough call, isn't it? Because you've said that it's not one big issue, it's lots of different issues. But if you look at journalism today, the ability to have that amount of expertise within newspapers that are closing down or shedding stuff, how does that even work?
No one knows the answer to that yet. We're doing, at National Geographic, we've created, and we're expanding this grant support mostly for independent journalists, the ones who may not be full-time in a newsroom anymore, to tell ambitious stories. These are grants that are for early career grants, which for anyone 18 and up. So, journalism students, for example. And then there's bigger, up to like $30,000, $40,000 grant for someone at a senior level to kind of dig deep on an issue. And with that kind of support, then you can sustain having this kind of reporting flow around. It's a different model than everything having to sell itself, and then a subscription model. You know, everything there is kind of open questions.
I do have one final question, which is sort of, you know, in my career as a journalist, which also goes back a long time, I've always said to some extent the public gets the media it deserves. And is there a public appetite for the good news stories that Heidi's talking about?
Well, this is where, you know, I'm a journalist, I've grown up as a journalist, but I also am a facilitator of everyone communicating. You know, we just finished taping a set of 31-minute videos for me to explain how to write for the internet with impact. There's one on how to take pictures, one on photography, one on how to do public speaking. They're mostly for our grantees, the scientists who get grants, but they'll be ultimately for everyone. So my goal, like my one hashtag, if it could be like right here, is make reality cool again.
You can get a tattoo.
And I'm not sure. No, because that would imply it's a permanent question.
Or a cap.
And it has to be cool. And this is
More practical.
But you really hit on one of the tough realities, which is human nature seems to attract us to the moment and to the clickable, scary thing, and then we move on. So we have this weird paradox inside us of being attracted to those polarizing, hard, scary things, and then we have status quo bias, which pulls us back to being boring, normal people. And how do you facilitate real change with those habits? I think it really goes down the chain to kids, and which is why here, what I saw that just now so excited me, was this group of elementary school students who were being unleashed on the floor with the posters, and you know, and that I took a pic, I just put it on Instagram. I was like, yes, you know, the more of that, the better. And by the way, again, in National Geographic, you know, a huge push there is kids. Geo-inquiry is a hashtag for their push, and you know, if we don't start early on, if we do start early on, I think we can start to build a sense of engagement.
Andy, thanks ever so much indeed for joining us. Really appreciate it, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
AGU TV has all the coverage you could want from this year's conference. Now make sure to explore all of our content, which is updated each and every day of the conference, to stay up to date with all the very latest AGU news.